Hello, everyone. I'm Shuba Srinivasan, and this is a project co-authored with a doctoral student, Chen Jing, who's in the audience. The title is Do or Do Not, There is No Try, Managing and Mitigating Socio-Political Firm Risk Events. It's also co-authored with DK Lee and Susan Fournier. Oh, sorry, I'm going back. In search of value creation, firms are engaging with socio-political events, such as the ones that we show here. For example, Starbucks had a racial incident where there were two Black employees who were arrested for not buying any coffee and hanging out in the store. AT&T is the second example shown here, where the company ran into issues related to their absence policies and gender discrimination. The third example is Enbridge, which had a pipeline issue, and climate activists sort of revolted at the Wisconsin-Minnesota border. A lot of companies are running afoul of these socio-political issues that span issues like gender, race, privacy, immigration, and so on. So in this paper, we are interested in understanding what is the role of firm response in mitigating the harm that firms might see from these socio-political events. For example, there might be a loss in brand reputation, there might be a loss in company value as investors might react adversely. And we're really interested in how does a firm response alleviate sort of the harm associated with these events. There are two types of responses that companies take. One is a low effort response, which might be to deny, issue a statement, have an apology, but no further actions. Or in the worst, or they may do nothing, there may be no response. In contrast, firms may have a high effort response, which might involve things like curtailing the offending action, having a training program, terminating employment of the offender, suspending operations, and settling and dismissing lawsuits. On the one hand, a high effort response is great because it mitigates the harm and it sort of lessens the brand reputation damage potentially, but it's a very costly effort. And it draws more attention to the event when the firm starts talking about the event. A low effort response, on the other hand, sort of lacks the trust that consumers would like to see from consumers, from the firm, but it's a low cost option and it keeps secondary attention away from the event. So our research questions here are to address what are the effects of high effort versus low effort firm responses in mitigating the harm of socio-political risk issues on social media reactions? The second question looks at the same sort of question, but the focus here is on investor reactions measured through abnormal stock returns. And the third question, we are interested in looking at what are the moderating effects of the brand reputation of the firm, the company involvement with the event, and importantly, the firm ESG performance, the role of the firm ESG performance. So our data and method, it's a very busy slide, but I'll summarize it in a nutshell. We have news reports on these risk-relevant incidents for a period from Feb 2018 to April 2019. Thanks to IMAP, we were able to get the sustained analytics data that allowed us to sort of pin down these events. And we augmented it with the Factiva news database search, having a team of RAs working through and sifting through these events. So we have something like 221 events from 144 firms. Looking at the table, the font is very small, but I'll tell you what we found. About half of the companies had a low effort response, which means they were denying or just issuing a statement. And the other half of the companies had a very high effort response. So there was no dominant strategy in terms of how firms are responding to these events. We augmented that data with data from Twitter. When it was known as Twitter, now it's X. We had data for 160 million tweets. And we wanted to distinguish tweets that had to do with a socio-political event, which is the tweets on the left are about AT&T and they pertain to their gender discrimination and absence policies, but the tweets on the right are about the company overall. So we wanted to be able to differentiate between these two, for which we used heavy-duty machine learning machinery. We used something called BERT tweet that allows us to separate these two types of social media posts, those that pertain to the socio-political issue from those that are about the brand overall. And the BERT tweet did a fairly good job in sort of differentiating them. We used weighter sentiment analysis to look at the sentiment associated with the social media post. Was it neutral? Was it positive? Was it negative? And then we used causal techniques based on differences in differences with multiple time periods to account for the staggered adoption of the responses by these different companies. So those are our methods. A lot of time and effort went into those stages. So what did we find? In a nutshell, looking at the top right, we see that companies that have a high effort response, the red circle there, or the oval, are able to do better than those that have no response in terms of mitigating the volume of chatter that happens on social media about the socio-political issue. They mitigate the share of negative sentiment towards a socio-political issue, and they have a positive spillover effect, which is seen in the last couple of rows, where there is a positive spillover from this towards the brand away from the socio-political issue. In terms of the low effort, we found that there's no difference between low effort or no effort. So in other words, do or do not, there is no try. That's where the title comes from. For the heterogeneous treatment effects, we found that firms with strong brand equity do even better in terms of weathering the harm from these types of crises. And ESG works in the same way as a strong brand, which is that firms with strong ESG performance received a stronger mitigation effect. We also looked at investor response, and we find that strong brands do even better when it comes to investor reactions, because investors take into account both the consumer reaction as well as the cost and the benefit trade-off. So the key takeaway from this is that both strong brands and strong ESG performance serve as buffers that come in handy when firms encounter these socio-political risk events. Chen will be here at the reception, and I'm sure he'll be happy to answer questions that you might have. Thank you, guys.